afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. We can do what my son's teacher does, which is 3, 2, 1. No, everyone, it's so wonderful to be here with you today. I want to say good afternoon and welcome. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces and also new faces here in the room. And just thank you for being here as we release the findings from the 2025 Military Family 360. Today's audience reflects something I've always appreciated about this community. We have military families, senior military leaders, policymakers, researchers, practitioners, corporate partners, philanthropists, and military and veteran service organizations who have gathered here today to learn. And we're not only learning for the sake of learning, but we're learning for the sake of action. Because today isn't simply about a report. It's an opportunity to challenge assumptions, identify where progress is happening, and to have honest conversations about where the work remains. Before we dive in, a few housekeeping notes. We're going to share a lot today, so there's going to be a lot of information coming your way. Some of what we are going to share is heavy. We recommend that if you need to take a step out, have a glass of water, collect yourself, please feel free to do that. And as a room full of helpers, it's important for us always to remember that we have to put our oxygen masks on first. So if you need to take a minute to step outside, that is completely fine. I want to thank the people who have made today possible. First of all, to our presenting sponsor, CVS Health, and to the many partners who believe in this work. We know that the power of data truly does drive meaningful change. To our board of directors, thank you for your leadership and partnership. I want to especially call out Tim Grayler, our board chair, and also our past board chair, Dolores Johnson-Davis, who I know is watching on the live stream. Hi, Dolores. Thank you for your incredible support, and thank you for being here as we've grown. I also want to recognize a few people who've been alongside MFAN since the very beginning. Rosemary Williams, Jack Benson, Kevin Miller, and Joseph Ney, thank you for your friendship, your counsel, your unwavering support. Organizations don't grow alone, and MFAN would not be where we are today without the people who believed in our mission, encouraged our growth, and invested in our future. To the installation partners, military and veteran service organizations, advocates, researchers, and supporters who helped us make sure as many people as possible participated in this survey, thank you. And to the MFAN team, research like this does not happen by accident. It takes curiosity, rigor, discipline, and an incredible amount of teamwork. To our research team, programs team, advancement team, operations team, and to every single member of the MFAN staff who contributed to this effort, thank you. I've had the privilege of seeing the countless hours, the thoughtful debates, and the true commitment to getting this right, and it couldn't make me any prouder. And finally, on a personal note, I want to thank my husband, Alexei, who is joining us today, which is very meaningful because this is the first MFAN event he's been to since I was 9 months pregnant with George, who is now 8 years old, and Rosemary was in full crisis response mode in case he made an early delivery. But Alexei, thank you for standing by me. Thank you for supporting this work. And to Sophia and George, who I'm sure are watching either now or later, thank you for your incredible love. It's a true honor to be your wife and your mom, Sophia and George. And last but not least, the people who participated in this research. Thank you for trusting us. Every time we field a survey, people have an option to participate or not, and families put their trust in us. And that trust is the foundation of this report. For more than a decade, military families have shared their lives with us, and what began as an effort to understand military families' experiences has grown into one of the most comprehensive examinations of military family life in the country. With each survey cycle, the data becomes stronger, our understanding deepens, and our responsibility also grows. At MFAN, we believe that data should do more than describe a problem. It should help us understand what's changing, where families are doing well, where they're struggling, and where action is needed. The findings here represent the experiences of thousands of families who entrusted us with their stories. Some findings might reinforce what we already know, others may challenge assumptions or raise entirely new questions. And that's why this research matters. Because the goal is not just to simply collect and report data, the goal is to make better decisions and to truly understand the realities of these military families so that we can make better decisions today and tomorrow. It's now my privilege to introduce the MFAN research team. We're going to start off with Dr. Gabby L'Esperance and Dr. Shanna Smith, who are going to share the first part of our findings.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Gabby L'Esperance, the Vice President of Research and Evaluation with the Military Family Advisory Network. I'm here with my colleagues, Dr. Shanna Smith and Dr. Jessica Lukehart, and we're going to share findings today. Military families are essential to the strength of our all-volunteer force. Yet their experiences are often disconnected from the decisions and policies that are intended to support them. For more than a decade, MFAN has worked to close that gap, to ensure that decisions affecting military families are informed by evidence, lived experiences, and long-term trends rather than a single moment in time. The Military Family 360 is the largest largest independent study of military families in the United States. What we share today is what families are experiencing right now, but they're also the conditions that shape the well-being and readiness in the years ahead. This isn't just another report. It represents an evolution in how we view the backbone of our national defense. And research is only the starting point. MFAN uses data in everything we do. By connecting military families, military leaders, policymakers, nonprofits, funders, community organization, and private sector partners, we help ensure that support systems evolve alongside the military families they're intended to serve. The national defense discourse often focuses around pillars of lethality, modernization, and warrior ethos. But true readiness, the ability to deploy, fight, and win, depends on something more fundamental: people. And people depend on their support networks. Our primary guiding research question was simple but critical. How do strong families support the national defense strategy? Specifically, how do family systems enable or constrain mission readiness?
So to that point, to answer this fundamental question, we actually redesigned our approach this year around 5 interlocking dimensions of readiness, grounded in established frameworks such as Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. We treat these topics throughout the report not as isolated issues, but as a truly interconnected system. To further explain, economic stability anchors the foundation. When basic needs are unmet, sustaining higher level needs becomes difficult. From this base, healthcare access, employment, and community connection build upward, each shaped by the conditions below while simultaneously shaping those above. And at the apex lies family functioning, where the cumulative influence of all other dimensions converge. Strain at any level sends pressure throughout the entire system. However, strength in one area can certainly bolster the rest. Prior to data collection, the 2025 survey instrument was reviewed and approved by the Wayland Baptist University Institutional Review Board. It is an institution that is known for its deep support of the military community, and their oversight ensured that our study adhered to the highest ethical standards for research involving human subjects. Also, to ensure consistency and comparability with prior survey iterations, we continued to use established validated scales. As you can see on the left side of the screen, these include the Family Health Scale, the HUD Housing Burden Scale, and the USDA 6-item short form food security scale. In the 2025 iteration, we also employed a number of new scales, which you can see there on the right, and we'll talk a little bit more about those here in a moment. These quantitative measures were complemented by expanded, open-ended qualitative questions that allowed respondents to articulate their experiences in their own words, ensuring that the input reflected both quantitative reality and the human lived experience. Throughout the report and today's discussion, you will hear how these established and new measures intersect and compound. They add significant depth to this year's findings, and we're really proud about that. Lastly, data collection ran from October 2025 through January 2026, and it is important to note that this period coincided with a federal government shutdown and concurrent emergency response activities. We recognize that these findings may have influenced survey responses, especially with regard to stress indicators, but they do add a critical layer of context to our findings this year.
To ensure that these findings are a true reflection of military life, the Military Family 360 intentionally engaged a robust and diverse cross-section of our community. We collected responses from 10,089 individuals in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and locations outside the continental U.S. 10,089. This sample reflects the backbone of the force. Primarily enlisted, post-9/11 era married families with children living in communities across the nation. The sample was made up of predominantly currently serving families at 71.2%, with about a quarter comprising families who had transitioned from military service. In terms of role, respondents were most likely to be active duty spouses at 36.2% of the sample, or active duty service members themselves at 22.7%. And crucially, this sample is deeply representative of the enlisted ranks. 80.4% of respondents identified as part of enlisted families, and nearly half, at 49.1%, fell specifically between the E4 to E6 pay grades. This ensures that we're hearing directly from mid-level service members who form the operational core of the military, a population that in some surveys isn't holistically represented.
Service branch also mirrored the broader force structure, with the majority of respondents connected to the Army at 52.8%, followed by the Air Force at 20.4%, and the Navy at 15.8%. Furthermore, the study is also deeply rooted in the modern generation of service, with 81.4% of respondents affiliated with the post-9/11 era. Most respondents in 2025 were female, and more than a third were between the ages of 30 and 39. Also reflecting broader patterns seen across the total force, more than 2/3 identified as white, with Black or African American respondents comprising the second largest group at 11.3%. Now, in terms of household structure, the vast majority of respondents were married at 83.5%, a figure that climbs even higher amongst our currently serving and active duty populations. And also, household most commonly were between 2 and 4 members at nearly 70% across the sample. But more crucially than that, 76.4% of respondents reported having children under the age of 18. And so these demographics aren't just numbers, they are actually very central to understanding the dynamics throughout this report, where parenting responsibilities intersect with service obligations, and we'll get more to that here shortly.
And now we're going to dive into our first construct, economic stability. In 2025, topics such as housing, food security, and financial vulnerability were very much intertwined. For the first time in 2025, we applied the Melbourne Institute Financial Wellbeing Scale to gain further depth of understanding of respondents' financial stability. And the financial conditions that shape whether a family can sustain service show up clearly in what it revealed. Among the full population, 17.6% said that they were doing great. Meanwhile, 41% indicate that they are just getting by. Rank and income drive this divide. As another driver of economic stability, we once again asked respondents about their annual gross household income, including all military allowances for those who receive them. The findings revealed that 37.7% of respondents reported a household income above $100,000 a year, a figure more common among officer families than their enlisted counterparts. Meanwhile, 24.2% fell between $50,000 and $74,999 a year, and 21% reported making less than $50,000 a year in total household income. We recognize that the military compensation package is complex, so we excluded those respondents who lived in military housing and ran those numbers yet again. 17.4% reported a household income below $50,000. 22.2% reported making between $50,000 and $74,999. 17.3% reported an annual household income between $75,000 and $99,999, And finally, 45.1% reported an annual household income above $100,000.
However, household income that looks stable in one duty location can certainly leave a family in crisis in another, depending on those housing costs and, of course, family size, like we talked about. Because MFAN's data is tracked down to the zip code level and research is conducted in-house, for the first time in 2025, MFAN was also able to examine LMI, or low to moderate income status levels, by layering in local cost data against household size and geography against the HUD income limit data. This actually resulted in a much clearer picture of vulnerability than we've ever had before. So when we combine all categories for nearly 1 in 4 respondents, that's 24.4%, they fell into a vulnerable income bracket. Again, the disparities continue by subpopulation, with 34.1% of currently serving enlisted families falling into those categories. And for junior enlisted families, this actually rose to 57.2% compared to just 4.1% of officer family respondents. But beyond income, economic stability also depends on resource management and the preparedness for unexpected events. Across the full sample, at 30.7%, they reported having less than $500 in emergency savings or no emergency fund at all. For currently serving families, this number rose to 34.1%. And the impact of this gap becomes clear when we consider that half of currently serving family respondents experienced a financial emergency within the past 2 years. So for those households without the financial reserves, this unforeseen cost can certainly move from manageable disruptions to potential crises. While identifying barriers to savings, respondents also cited rising grocery prices at 57.7% and also high housing costs, followed by unplanned car repairs as the primary factors to barriers to saving money. Notably, spouse employment issues were cited by 33.5% of currently serving families as a major barrier to savings for the first time in 2025. This does represent a change from our previous survey cycles, where general cost of living and income constraints were the dominant themes. But in 2025, grocery prices and spousal employment challenges have become more prominent obstacles. With that, I will pass it back over to Gabby.
Thank you, Shanna. Housing represents one of the most significant and least controllable items in a military household budget. MFAN uses the housing burden, or measures housing burden, using the HUD housing burden scale, a measure of the percentage of monthly income that families are using for housing expenses, such as mortgage or rent and utilities. Paying between 30 and 49% indicates a housing burden. Paying more than 50% indicates a severe housing burden. In 2025, 84.4% of respondents reported carrying a housing burden, paying more than they can comfortably afford for rent or mortgage and utilities, slightly higher than our findings in 2023. The most striking disparity lies between officer and enlisted families. Junior enlisted respondents reported the highest rate of severe housing burden across all groups. This strain is concentrated among currently serving families, households earning under $75,000 a year, and those who have recently PCS'd, where housing burden exceeds 90% of the respondents. In contrast, veteran and retirees families report considerably lower burdens, and we detail out these subpopulation findings in our full report in more detail. In terms of housing expenses beyond the basic allowance for housing, among all active duty family respondents, 59.3% reported paying more than what BAH covers. 31.3% reported that they were paying between $251 and $400 out of pocket every month over what BAH covers. The proportion of military families experiencing food insecurity has also shifted. MFAN once again used the USDA 6-item short-form food security scale. And in 2025, we aligned the categorization thresholds with those last used by the Department of War, ensuring that the comparability with federally reported data, as well as continuity within the broader national conversation on food access. In 2025, 41.2% of respondents reported low or very low food security. Currently serving families are hit the hardest. 47.2% were facing food insecurity compared to only 25.2% of veterans. And knowing that food security is also about access, when a single service members were removed from this analysis, the food insecurity proportion was almost unchanged at 47.1%. This consistency across household types reflects the genuine lived reality of military families. Among the full sample, we again see a divide with rank at the center. 57% of enlisted families face food insecurity, compared to only 13.7% of officer families. For junior enlisted families, that number jumps to 74.1%. When we talk about food insecurity, we're also asking families if they can afford to eat balanced, nutritious diets, including fruits, vegetables, and proteins. 41% of respondents told us that affording balanced meals was a challenge. And when we asked them to describe the specific barriers they face, the overwhelming driver was clear: food costs, which was noted by 55% of respondents, 53.8%.
You know, financial stress carries emotional weight too. In 2025, 24.4% of currently serving families reported extreme financial stress over the last year, with another 23.7% reporting high stress. These levels were lower among veterans and retirees, where only 16.5% reported extreme stress. Rank also correlates with those stress levels. 49.7% of enlisted families reported high or extreme financial stress, compared to 21% of officer family respondents. Financial stress is certainly tied to the debt that families carry. When assessing specific debt sources, credit cards emerged as the leading stressor for 55.7% of respondents, followed by auto loans, mortgages, and student loans, as you can see there on the screen. And actually, this ranks the first time that credit cards have appeared highest in MFAN survey history, signaling how families are increasingly relying on involving debt to bridge that gap between income and the cost of daily life. So the next slide here, it highlights these economic pressures. They don't arrive as isolated incidents. Our statistical analysis we deepened this year, and it confirmed that food security, housing burden, and financial well-being are linked within a larger web of challenges. High housing costs crowd out food budgets, and financial stress that I just talked about really deepens both. These pressures don't exist in a silo, they ripple outward, and they persist across every construct in the full report. Ultimately, stable access to food and shelter acts as that critical protective factor. It allows families to maintain focus, strength, and cohesion that the mission demands. Without this foundation, the force itself and overall readiness becomes vulnerable. Before we move into our next construct, we want to pause and reflect on the human aspect of all that we've just heard. As mentioned, these pressures don't stay neatly in any one category. Much of what families are carrying goes unseen until you hear someone describe the day-to-day labor of what it looks like holding it all together. So take a look at the screen to learn more.
We have 3 kids, a newly 12-year-old, a almost 10-year-old, and a 5-year-old, 2 girls and a boy, all born in different places. We've been in Atlanta now right now at 4 years, which has felt more grounded for the kids. They have memories of our previous duty station, but it kind of stops there, even though they've been world travelers.
We were at the Pentagon up until December of 2024, and then we PCS'd over Christmas break and arrived here Christmas, like 2 days before Christmas, on Whidbey Island. We've moved a lot. We move every 2 or 3 years. We've moved about 7 times, but this past move was very difficult. A lot of different pieces that could go wrong did go wrong. Our delivery truck broke down on the mountains, and when it broke down on the mountain here in Washington State, all of our stuff got moved off of the big truck onto 2 separate U-Hauls, and they got lost. And then they ended up on a ferry, and they didn't end up arriving at our house until about 2 weeks late. Out of all the moves we have, we're all due 1 bad move, so I'm hoping that was it.
It has also been extremely hard as a couple navigating life that way. And as your kids reach each different milestone, or I've had ups and downs in my career and things like that, it's just that push and pull of each other, of like, okay, this is your season to shine, or this is my season, and well, this is our season to just buckle down. But I wouldn't change that, because I think it has made us a very strong and like genuine family unit. We just keep everything in house that way. But it's hard as a couple, when you don't have the ability to step away ever. So
There's not a clear handbook or a roadmap to make it easier for families. You learn the hard way, but that you do that with a lot of things in life. You don't know what you don't know, and then once you know it, you want to tell everyone, or at least that's what I like to do.
My husband went through a lot, and I just didn't know how to help him. And I didn't know how to help as a mom, as a spouse, my son. Like, I really felt like I wanted to be distant from that as a spouse. Like, just as a wife, I didn't even realize I was like at that point a military spouse. So, the military for me didn't give me a good impression.
I always say we all have our own version of hard, and my hard isn't your hard, and your hard isn't my hard. But it doesn't make it any less hard. If we could figure out a way to make these processes better for everyone, because the weight of it being hard is actually hard.
along the way, that's where we try to tell the kids, like, this sucks. This really sucks right now. But it's not going to be this way forever. For all the list of things where you can say, my friends, I don't know this place, all this, I miss the house, all that stuff. There's going to be another list where you can say, but I get to do these things. I get to experience this new place. I get to move places that people, have never been their entire lives. Try to make that make sense for all three age groups is difficult, but they enjoy it to an extent. And it makes us stronger as a family, I think.
That weight, that planning you heard about in the video, the coordinating, the advocating, the starting over, it's certainly important context for the next section of our program today, because healthcare is not just about whether coverage exists, it's about whether care can be reached, continued, trusted, and managed throughout the realities of military life, like you heard in the video. So to help walk us through the healthcare findings, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica.
Thanks, Shanna. And as a quick reminder, today we're highlighting selected findings, and those are related to healthcare coverage for this section, along with general and mental health care, and some of the more sensitive dimensions of behavioral health. And like every section of today's presentation, this is all just a glimpse of a much deeper body of findings. The full report explores additional areas, including EFMP and SMP experiences, caregiving, and more. And it's now live on MFAN's website for you to dive in. So shifting back to our section here, what those findings revealed about healthcare for military families is that accessing it is consistently is anything but simple. The demands of military life disrupt healthcare in ways that civilian families rarely experience. And layer on top of that the practical realities of where families are stationed, what they're eligible for, and whether they trust the system or not enough to use it, and that can create compounding constraints. So looking first at healthcare coverage, 57.6% of currently serving families relied on TRICARE Prime as their primary coverage in 2025. And as you can see on the screen, that proportion was higher among active duty families. We did see that respondent usage of TRICARE Prime increased compared to 2023, but it remains below what we saw in 2019 when more than 72% of currently serving family respondents were enrolled. And then there were some families who lacked coverage altogether. For uninsured National Guard and Reserve family respondents, nearly 2/3 had gone without coverage for more than a year at 62.5%. Now, shifting to those who did have coverage, we asked respondents about the confidence that they had in their health care insurance for the first time in 2025. And high levels of confidence were reported by 45.7% of insured respondents. And these respondents believed that their insurance would cover the cost of their health care. And at the same time, nearly 1 in 5 respondents reported little to no coverage confidence. Adding context to these findings, MFAN also asked respondents what drove their selection of healthcare coverage. and several primary themes emerged that you can see on the screen. The top driver was cost, which was shared by nearly a third of respondents at 31.5%. And their comments ranged from general pricing concerns to specific worries about co-pays, premiums, and deductibles. And our full report does explore out-of-pocket medical costs in more detail. But here, the second most common driver of insurance decisions related to personal circumstances, and that was accounting for 23.4% of responses. These families cited unique medical conditions, retirement status, age, and specific needs of children or family members with disabilities. Now, both of these top two themes intersected with the two that follow, and together they reveal that insurance selection is deeply personalized. It's not just a transaction, it's a strategic decision that where families are balancing budget constraints against the specific health profiles and life stages of every family member. Now, beyond coverage and costs, MFAN also examined families' experiences accessing care. And where currently serving families receive most of their general health care was nearly evenly split. You can see 42% accessed care primarily at military treatment facilities or MTFs, while 41.7% relied on civilian providers. Urgent care facilities were the third most utilized at 7.1%. And as you can see on the screen, 5% reported receiving no health care at all in the past 2 years. For those respondents who did receive care, nearly half reported positive experiences accessing appointments, but just over 27% reported negative ones. Their access challenges concentrated in adult primary care, specialty care, and pediatric services. Now, stepping back from access to care, even routine healthcare decisions like where to fill a prescription are daily calculations that many military families are navigating. They're weighing time and cost, convenience, and service quality against what the system provides. And again, usage here was nearly evenly split. 43.5% of currently serving family respondents primarily used MTF pharmacies, and just over 40% relied on retail pharmacies. And when we asked them why they chose their primary pharmacy, 3 dominant themes emerged. And you can see on the screen, location and proximity were most common, and many respondents emphasized the importance of having a pharmacy that was close to their home or their work. Now, cost was another key consideration, and though some respondents did tell us that they were willing to pay slightly more to avoid long wait times or to secure better service. Convenience also mattered, and these respondents wanted streamlined services or the ability to consolidate their care all in one place. Now, insurance compatibility and specific pharmacy types also played a role, which elevates the nuance of context here. These decisions may seem routine, but they reflect the daily trade-offs that military families make to maintain continuity of care. Shanna?
So nowhere is that continuity of care that Jessica just referenced more acute and the cost of those trade-offs more consequential than in the mental health space. In 2025, there was a growing willingness to seek help, and nearly 60% of respondents would seek support for conditions like anxiety or depression, and 54.4% for personal difficulties like family conflicts or deployment stress. Despite this openness, there was a notable minority that remained hesitant. 11.4% stated that they would be extremely unlikely to seek help for personal difficulties, and 10.4% felt the same regarding mental health conditions. In the past 2 years, 54.6% of households had someone seek mental health care. Military spouses and service members were seeking help in nearly equal proportions at roughly 30%. Notably, a critical insight emerges when examining the timing of a permanent change of station move relative to mental health support. There was a statistically significant relationship between how recently a respondent had moved and their likelihood of seeking mental health support. The data revealed a delayed help-seeking pattern. The longer it had been since a PCS move, the more likely a household was to have utilized mental health services. Now, once families settle into, from their initial transition window and start to engage with the system, however, the experience appears more positive. In 2025, approximately half of respondents gave positive or very positive ratings to both the quality of mental health care providers at 52% and access to appointments at 49%. Now, challenges persisted for some at 23.3% rating access as negatively and 18.2% rating provider quality negatively. For those seeking non-clinical support, such as chaplains or TRICARE support services and Military OneSource, those were all the top choices seen in 2025, but overall, 61.5% of respondents indicated that they had not yet engaged or utilized those types of resources. So when care feels out of reach, some families turn to emergency services. And in the past 2 years, just over a quarter of currently serving family respondents reported using the emergency room for mental health care because they could not secure a timely appointment. 25.1%. And among those individuals, 52% reported that this actually happened more than once. This unfortunate reliance on crisis services points to a deeper underlying struggle within these households. 14% of currently serving family respondents reported that someone in their household experienced suicidal ideation. And in fact, the data affirms what has surfaced in recent news cycles. Military spouses were most often the population experiencing those thoughts, with rates higher than the U.S. general population, U.S. women, U.S. men, and married civilians. And of further note, the data says that military spouse was also the most frequently identified individual and household member that was needing emergency mental health care as well. The full report explores additional areas of household risk, such as substance abuse issues, household safety practices like firearm storage, and emergency preparedness. And together, these findings offer a broader picture of what military households are navigating when it comes to behavioral and mental health care. It is clear that general health care and mental health care access is a strategic necessity. It's not just a logistical one. When that care breaks down, strain intensifies. When care works, it stabilizes the household. And ensuring families can navigate this system with trust and with ease is an investment in the sustainability of the force itself.
So the healthcare experiences that we just explored, like the economic stability we discussed before that, do not exist in isolation. These conditions intersect with every other dimension of military family life and with readiness itself. And the same is true of employment. And we turn now to what military families can earn, build, and sustain professionally and why it matters to the force. Now, excluding active duty service members, nearly half of the respondent population reported being employed in 2025. But the data does reveal a growing strain, particularly among military spouses. Now, the unemployment rate among active duty spouse respondents who are actively looking for work rose to 29.9% in 2025, and that's up from 21.8% in 2023. Among those seeking work, nearly half had PCS'd within the past year. Now, looking at all employed respondents, again, excluding those active duty service members, their satisfaction with aspects of their employment is mixed. Schedule flexibility is a strength, with 70.5% reporting satisfaction there. But dissatisfaction is real in other areas. 28.9% are dissatisfied with their income, and 19.6% with career growth opportunities. Now, regardless of employment status, MFAN asked all respondents, again, except those active duty service members, about factors that may have impacted their participation in the workforce. The full report further explores those impacts, but today we'll highlight these first two. And among those who reported impacts, military lifestyle demands were the most frequently cited factor at 45.2%. And for active duty spouses, that figure rose to 64.7%. Now, child care compounds those pressures, and 41.7% of the full population identified this as a barrier, rising again to 56.3% among active duty spouses. This finding is reinforced by the 57.6% of active duty family respondents who told us in another line of questioning that insufficient child care negatively impacted their employment opportunities. And so this pattern is consistent. The barriers exist for everyone, but they concentrate on the spouses who are managing the household while the service member is drawn away for the mission. Now, the 2025 findings revealed a significant relationship between the timing of a PCS move and employment status for active duty spouses. Among those who had not moved recently, just over half reported being employed at 50.8%. But for those who had moved within the past 12 months, that figure drops to just 32.2%. Now, unemployment follows a similar pattern for active duty spouses. While 23% of those who had not recently moved were actively seeking work, that rate jumped to 40.1% for those who had recently moved. And this confirms a critical finding that the immediate aftermath of relocation remains a period of acute employment vulnerability. For military spouses, the cost of mobility is often paid in lost income and career continuity.
So despite the challenges that Jessica just highlighted, we need to call out that a disconnect remains between need and resource use. In 2025, 70.8% of active duty spouse respondents had not accessed formal employment resources in the past 2 years. But for those who did seek support, respondents most often shared that they accessed Military OneSource, followed by Hiring Our Heroes, and MySeco, which was recently rebranded as SpouseWorks. When we asked spouses directly what would best support their employment goals, the leading request was professional or senior level job placement assistance at 23.1%. Followed by these responses called out specific programs that they used and that were very helpful in their journey at 18.5%. And the request was for tailored career preparation and training at 16.6%. As mentioned earlier, the findings are a glimpse into what is unpacked in the full report. There is so much data in that report, and we encourage you to take a look. Among the other employment topics that are referenced there and that we explored there, we also dive into intersections with spouse employment and retention and readiness, so it's definitely worth a look. Employment is far more than this economic metric, though. It is a pillar that is foundational to forced sustainability. Our deep statistical modeling in this construct reveals that workforce participation directly correlates with higher family health scores, better financial security, and food stability. Conversely, unemployment acts as a multiplier for stress, driving down that mental well-being and increasing housing burden. Yet even when spouses can secure employment and families find their financial footing, they face another critical need, and one that cannot be solved by a paycheck. Military families need people. People who understand this lifestyle, who notice when something is hard, who can be named as that emergency contact, or who can simply make a new place feel a little less unfamiliar. For military families, community is not something that they can just sign up for or apply for. It is something that they have to rebuild again and again and again. And it truly takes a village. So take a look at the screen.
And we're all just people. And, a lot of people, we're trying to do our best, but, we're not perfect. And so mistakes happen. You would think things would run a lot more smooth than they do, but then you remember, it's just an organization like every other company I've worked at or any, process I've seen, it's not perfect. And so you just have to know that. But I've just been really surprised at, the quality of leadership that he works with and just how much they care for their people. It's a very good wing. And, the Utah Air National Guard is just known for that and known for their culture.
This is the first time we have had an emergency contact that was local. The rest of the time it's been like his mom, who, that's great, she's in another state. This is the first time where our neighbor has become really good friends. And I literally asked the question, would you mind being our emergency contact if the kids need to get picked up? After 15 years, is crazy.
I can't fix the problem, but I can help other people through it. And that makes me feel like I'm doing something. Because if we have to all work within the system, well, then let's work together because we're stronger in numbers. I live on an island, but no one should feel like they're an island.
Being a military spouse so young, not knowing the resources early on, and then not finding them out, even through combat deployments, activations, my husband being gone, not really finding about the resources until, 2015. And that's a long time to go without knowing. But once I was rolling and understood the resources that were available, I didn't feel alone. When it comes to resources, it takes one number It could take one number that gets you going from like another spouse. And then that spouse leads you to, hey, look, did you know about, this program in Military One Source? You know what? I'm getting together with other spouses. That moment in time is when I started to realize I needed to build my own village. So now I feel like when you can say I'm a military spouse, it's like I have a community. Like, they get me.
And that is the lived experience behind community connection. It's not just about whether a resource exists, it's about whether families know where to turn, whether they trust the system and the people around them, and whether they can feel like they belong before reaching that breaking point. This actually brings us to our next construct, and that is community connection. For if employment provides the resource, community provides the anchor. So I'm going to toss it back over to Jessica.
Thanks. Now, we know that military families are remarkably good at building community. The shared experience of service, the institutions that surround it, the bonds that form among people navigating the same demands. However, the transient nature of military life means that those networks must often be rebuilt in new places, among new neighbors, and near new installations. And so to contextualize this critical aspect of military life, we examined both the lifetime frequency and recency of PCS moves. For active duties families specifically, 3/4 relocated within the past 24 months. And as you can see on the screen, 48.3% of all currently serving respondents reported 1 to 4 moves recently. But frequency and recency do tell different stories. As with other areas across the study, we analyzed those experiences along key indicators of overarching well-being. In terms of frequency, families with 3 to 5 moves carried the heaviest weight across housing burden, food security, and invisible family load, which is a scale that we'll explore more in the next section. However, families with 6 or more moves often fared better, suggesting that career progression and income growth eventually offset some of that disruption. Now, looking at recency, families who moved within the past 6 to 12 months reported notably worse outcomes across nearly every material measure: housing burden, financial well-being, food security, and family health. To better understand these outcomes, MFAN asked respondents who moved in the past 2 years more about the move itself. And our findings showed that the PCS experience is highly inconsistent for military families. You can see on screen a comparative breakdown of move ratings by time frame, but among all respondents who moved in the past 2 years, just over a third, at 35.5%, rated their move positively, and 27.7% offered negative ratings, and just over a third described the process as neutral. Now, these relocation experiences are varied, but one finding stands out, that 37.1% chose to manage their own move rather than rely on the official moving system. But for those who did use the official moving process, most reported no major delivery problems at 65.7%. But for those who did, the issues centered on goods held in storage, extended delivery timelines, and communication breakdowns with moving companies. And despite the expectations of full oversight, only 54.4% reported that an installation representative had inspected their pack-out. For many families, the military moves are not just a logistical challenge. They introduce stress, financial risk, and uncertainty at precisely the moment that they're trying to reestablish stability. And as you can see on the screen, the financial burden of relocation has intensified since 2023. These costs arrive during that period when families are often managing multiple transitions simultaneously, from housing and schools to employment and healthcare. And when those out-of-pocket costs beyond reimbursement are examined, 21.2% paid up to $1,000 over reimbursement, and a concerning 60.1% paid more than $1,000.
It is a concerning data point for sure. Now we're going to shift a little bit and look at logistics. So logistically, families also rely on temporary lodging while awaiting permanent housing. Among those who did use temporary lodging in the past 2 years, overall, the largest proportion reported staying less than 10 nights at 41.7%. However, as you can see on the screen, there's a lot of variance in the duration of stays when we look deeper at the specific time frame of respondents' moves, as well as comparing it to what we saw in the 2023 data set. But once families move past the temporary phase and secure permanent housing, their experience depends heavily on where they end up. To understand these patterns, we asked respondents to self-identify their community setting for the first time in 2025. The majority, 50.7%, live in suburban areas, followed by rural at 24.9% and urban at 18.8%. And for currently serving families, in 2025, this often statistically meant living near larger or medium-sized installations where local resource availability is oftentimes directed by the base location. Where families settle matters critically. While 39.5% of active duty family respondents lived in privatized military housing, the vast majority of currently serving families live on the private economy, so that's 65.4%. But for those in military housing, affordability at 56.6%, market conditions at 43.2%, and commute logistics 39.9% were the primary drivers and reasons for military families choosing to live in privatized military housing in 2025. Additionally, satisfaction with privatized housing has improved slightly, especially with regard to neighborhood quality. However, in 2025, a significant dissatisfaction persisted regarding the perceived value that's relative to the basic allowance for housing and the overall condition of the home that the family was receiving.
So as families establish themselves in a community, support resources can play an important role in navigating both their everyday challenges and those major transitions. So across the population, 2/3 of our respondents told us that they rely on military resources, and nearly half turned to community nonprofits, and another 45.2% told us that they utilized government services. When we asked our respondents what shaped their decisions on where they turned for support, 5 key themes emerged that you can see on screen. Access came first, because for many families, it's not simply about whether a resource exists. It's about whether they can realistically get to it, if they can afford it, and if they see themselves as the recipient. Trust was another key factor for military families. They weighed the organization's reputation, confidentiality, and whether a provider truly understands military life before they feel comfortable reaching out. Circumstances also shaped where families turned. What a family's facing in a given moment often determines not just what kind of support they need, but where it makes sense to look. Now, a closely related theme followed: the type of support needed, whether it was financial, health-related, or mental health, and that shapes where families turn as well. And finally, cost. For a meaningful share of respondents, whether a service is free, low cost, or covered by insurance determines whether or not they pursue it at all. And that was an echo of that access theme that ran through so many of their responses.
So to recap this construct, rebuilding community with every move is one of the defining demands of military life. When the systems meant to support that process fall short, whether that is in housing or moving logistics or access to resources, the effects show up across family health, financial well-being, and the invisible load that families carry, which we'll introduce in our next construct. The data makes this statistical connection all clear. One thing to note about the community construct, I know there's a lot of interest around transition from military service, and the full report unpacks that as well. So we're gonna start to transition and talk about our final construct for the day, and that is family functioning. As a reminder, that is our apex of readiness here. It's not just a static state. It is the dynamic balance emerging from the interplay of structural, relational, and economic conditions. The goal isn't just to reduce strain, it's to build environments where families can thrive. And the 2025 data reveals a cautiously optimistic trend. Among currently serving families, poor family health ratings fell from 23.2 in 2023 to 12.5% in 2025. With that context of difference in our respondent population and broader economic environments in mind, we dove deeper and found that half of these families, at 49.2% of the full population and 52.4% of the currently serving population, occupy this moderate zone of family well-being. They appear stable but vulnerable, and we'll examine what we call the moderate middle here in just a moment. While the full report unpacks a wide range of family factors that are affecting readiness, today we're going to zero in and focus on one specific yet foundational reality, and that is childcare. So Gabby's going to share more.
Thanks, Shanna. For families, childcare isn't just a logistical issue. It's an engine that drives employment, stability, and the ability to function. The passage on the screen highlights that for military families, childcare shapes so many aspects of their daily lives and ultimately the household's capacity to support a mission-ready service member. 51.6% of currently serving parent respondents reported a need for childcare or suitable childcare, which is consistent with our findings from 2023. School-aged care, trusted caregivers, and licensed childcare topped the list of needs. But those numbers only tell part of the story. When we asked families to describe the relationship between childcare and readiness in their own words, 4 themes came through clearly. Access challenges led at 42.8%. They told us about waitlists, limited availability, and care that simply doesn't exist or doesn't fit a military schedule. Spouse employment issues followed at 30.5%. Respondents described how childcare gaps don't just inconvenience, they force parents out of the workforce entirely. Cost came in at 28.6%, and military-specific issues, unpredictable schedules, PCS disruption, the particular rhythm of military service accounted for 20.2% of comments. What respondents described wasn't a logistical frustration. It was a system that isn't keeping pace with what families actually need. And yet there's a disconnect. Most active duty parents were unaware of key child care benefits that are available to them. The report proportions reflected on the screen catch that awareness gap. 61.3% were unaware of flexible spending accounts. 61.1% were unaware of the Military Child Care in Your Neighborhood Plus program, and 59% did not know about the military child care subsidy.
You know, that lack of awareness that Gabby just described leaves families navigating complex situations without a roadmap. It is a primary reason why so many remain in this precarious state. Again, as mentioned, half of our respondents, whether it was the full population or the currently population, fall into what we're calling the moderate middle. They're functioning, they're managing, but the data shows that they carry a real vulnerability. Readiness factors must account for this population too. And among those reporting poor family health, the picture sharpens a bit more. Those reporting poor family health are predominantly currently serving, with the highest concentrations among Army respondents, enlisted personnel in the E4 to E6 range, and the 35 to 39 age group. And this highlights some intense pressure that is centering on those mid-career service members. Yet military families demonstrate a remarkable strength, and the flourishing scale helps us see where in the 2025 iteration of the survey. 34.8% of respondents score in the high flourishing range, indicating thriving among multiple components of life. Another 50% fall in that moderate range again, and only 15.2% report low or very low flourishing. As we've seen throughout the findings, financial conditions matter here too. Financial well-being is strongly associated with flourishing, and that $75,000 annual household income threshold surfaces yet again throughout the report as a meaningful dividing line. Notably, families with children in the home report higher flourishing scores, a reminder that even amidst the strain and stressors, those family connections do matter. But the data also points to something beyond the material, and more than half of respondents at 56.6% reported agreement with feeling grounded in their religious or spiritual beliefs. And another 37.3% reported agreement with military connection and identity as an important part of who they are. Respondents who scored high, or reported stronger alignment actually with either of those two dimensions also reported higher flourishing scores, suggesting that that meaning, that identity, and that purpose serve as a meaningful buffer and a protective factor against the pressures that we document throughout the 2025 report.
While flourishing provides a buffer, maintaining that stability comes at a cost. MFAN measured that cost using the invisible family load scale, which captures the cognitive and emotional labor of keeping a household running. The planning, the coordinating, the anticipating that largely goes unseen. And not all of this labor registers as a burden. Much of it is simply part of functioning, and some of it can feel meaningful and rewarding. But when it accumulates into higher invisible load scores, it shows up as worse outcomes across family health and flourishing. Only 7.1% of the sample reported a low burden, indicating that some family load is carried by almost every respondent. However, it's not distributed equally. Currently serving family respondents carry substantially higher loads than those who have transitioned. And a closer look at active duty spouse respondents show that they consistently trend worse than any other service-connected population. Even after service ends for a family, the invisible load disparity persists. Spouses of veterans and retirees can continue to carry more than the service member themselves. Household composition adds yet another layer to this picture. The presence of children is associated with a substantially higher invisible load, one of the strongest associations in the data set. Among active duty families, 79.6% have children under the age of 18, creating a critical structural overlap here. The years of heaviest parenting responsibility coincide precisely with the years of heaviest operational demand. To extend these findings into lived experiences, we asked a new open-ended question in 2025, asking currently serving respondents to describe how family roles shift when operational demand rises. 4 distinct themes emerge, and nearly half, at 44.7%, describe a familiar pattern: one partner absorbing the weight of domestic life while the other serves. Ultimately, our 2025 data confirms that family readiness is a dynamic environment where burden concentrates on currently serving families. The invisible load is carried by almost everyone, with weights heaviest on spouses, parents, and those still embedded in active duty military life. The years of peak operational demand overlap with peak parenting responsibility, creating a structural tension that no amount of individual resilience can fully resolve. Supporting these households is essential not only to reduce strain, but to sustain the engagement and identity that strengthen the force. When the household is stable, the benefits ripple outward, enhancing deployability and long-term mission commitment. Everything that we have covered so far points to the same reality. Readiness is sustained in the home, and the home depends on us, the support systems and advocates for our military community. The most important support system a service member has is their family unit. Families absorb the moves, the uncertainty, the caregiving, the career trade-offs, the planning, but also the pride. They believe in service, but that belief alone cannot be enough to carry a household forever. As we move into our recruitment and retention findings, we want to hear directly from families about what service means to them and what it takes to keep choosing this life. Take a look at the screen.
That I understand what it's like to be isolated and not know, but then know and have those resources. So it's good to know the resources and not need them, than need the resources and not know where to go. Because at the end of the day, we're not alone. It may feel like that for sure. And that's what I felt like for such a long time.
At this point, it's about stability, not stability in where we are, but stability in our planning for the future. And so if the longer you're in helps you on the back end because you get a bigger retirement and maybe I'm out of work, those things, that's what we're looking towards. So it's like, if we got to do 5, if we got to do 10 to get a bigger payout at the end in order to have better medical and things right now for the kids, then that's just what we do.
Trying to understand without feeling sorry for us. Be like, oh, that must be so hard, right? And it is challenging, but that's what makes us who we are. It's okay to ask questions and not know what that looks like, but it's okay to ask those questions and say, I really want to understand, and how can we support you?
He has a job, and a lot of people in the military, this is like their day-to-day, this is their job, this is what they know, this is what they do. And they do it because they value service, but it's like, but it's only one facet of them.
When we are looking at our big picture, we have to really take a second look. And I think a lot of military families are feeling that right now.
Unless you've lived it, you understand what it feels like, maybe sometimes to feel undervalued as a military spouse, to feel like you have to figure it out, to feel like, that's what you signed up for. But then you also see sometimes that light when people say, you know what, we appreciate military spouses.
all of these things impact readiness and they impact retention. So when Dan specifically is talking about different programs that he could get involved in or apply for, or promotions, we look at it very hard because of the weight of things that we've carried and gone through. And we honestly are taking a very hard look at those just to make sure that we're in the right place and that we are able to make those decisions that's best for our families.
Those folks that you've been hearing from today are members of our advisory board, and we want to take a moment to thank every single advisory member for sharing their stories. Specifically to Ellie, Seth, Meg, and Vanessa, thank you so much for giving us a glimpse into the military life behind the data. Your videos and stories bring us to the future of the force. When families feel supported, connected, and able to build a life in military service, that strengthens retention. When the burden becomes too heavy or the future feels uncertain, families begin to question whether staying is sustainable.
Absolutely. I think we can all take a deep breath here. We have heard a lot of data today. And, just this construct wraps it all together. This is our recruitment and retention component here. So you moved through and you heard all of these different constructs today, packed with a ton of data. This final component brings it all together, and the 2025 Military Family 360 Survey confirms what data has been pointing towards all along, that military family conditions are not the background noise to readiness, they are readiness. The 5 dimensions that we've explored, economic stability, healthcare, employment, community, and family functioning, fundamentally shape whether families are willing to stay, serve, and recruit others into the force. So for the first time in 2025, we measured public service motivation. We measured these subscales, and it captures respondents' level of agreement with statements regarding commitment to societal well-being, compassion for others, and collective interest. And the results were striking. Compassion leads at 67.2%, followed by the commitment to public service at 65.8%, and self-sacrifice at 58.6%. Notably, National Guard and Reserve families scored higher than active duty families across all measures. Similarly, formerly serving families report higher scores than currently serving ones. And these values operate in a mutually reinforcing cycle with family health, spirituality, and military identity. Together, they create this resilience ecology that sustains the military life cycle. But what drives the decisions to join in the first place, or the motivations to sign up and serve? In 2025, career opportunities at 42.8% and financial stability at 40.9% emerged as the dominant motivators overall, followed closely by patriotism at 34.3%. But oftentimes, motivation alone is not enough. Long-term retention hinges on whether reality meets those expectations. And on paper, the picture looks strong. 76.8% say experiences either met expectations regarding mission and scope, but 74.5% cite service member career opportunities positively as well. But then when we start to drill down and look beneath the surface, the deepest gaps lie where we saw pressures elsewhere throughout the study. Military spouse career opportunities, where 62.5% report falling below expectations, and work-life balance at 55.8%. But zeroing in a little bit further, for spouses, the priorities shift and they are different. Their motivations for family service were predominantly financial stability or job security for the family. And yet expectations were unmet across the board. So not only were spousal career opportunities and work-life balance falling short, as we see there on the screen, but spouses reported mental health support and children's needs were also falling below expectations as well. When the promise of service clashes with the complex reality, particularly for the family partner, the foundation of retention may begin to fracture. And this misalignment is reflected in satisfaction trends. In 2025, 40.9% of currently serving family respondents reported decreased satisfaction with military life. While the gap between negative and positive sentiment has narrowed slightly since 2023, a more critical trend to zoom into here has also emerged. That uncertainty has surged. It's actually nearly quadrupled from 2.7% to 10.3% in 2025. So families aren't just solely dissatisfied, they are unsure, and that begs questions about how external factors may impact these families.
To understand this landscape, we must examine the environments that shape it, specifically branch morale and command climate. In 2025, satisfaction with branch morale was slightly more common than dissatisfaction. 35.5% report being satisfied compared to 29.9% who reported dissatisfaction. Similarly, satisfaction with the immediate chain of command was the more common sentiment. 38.1% reported high or very high satisfaction compared to 26.6% who were dissatisfied or very dissatisfied. Despite the challenges and frustration, and in light in the joy of pride in military life, 61.3% would still recommend a military career to someone they care about, a slight recovery from our findings in 2023. However, active duty spouses remain the least likely to recommend at 50.9%, compared to 74.5% of retiree family respondents. This contrast underscores a critical distinction. For those further removed from the daily realities of service, the passage of time can soften the edges of hardship, allowing memories of nostalgia, purpose, and camaraderie to dominate. More importantly, the anchors of retention are shifting. Currently serving families stay for retirement benefits, healthcare, and financial security. But what would compel them to stay longer has changed. In 2023, the dominant incentives were consistent income and increased pay. By 2025, those levers have pivoted toward quality of life factors. Work-life balance and stability of duty location choice came out on top. The next generation of retention depends on whether we address the quality of life and daily conditions that military families are experiencing today. When families can balance work and life, when they can choose where to put down roots, when the invisible load becomes visible, they stay. When they can't, that resilience ecology breaks, and readiness is fractured as a result. That concludes the presentation of our findings of the Military Family 360 survey. We welcome back Shannon Rasdin, our CEO, to the stage to present our strategic recommendations and actionable next steps. Shannon?
Please join me in giving the round of applause. What you saw really is the tip of the spear. We have 154 pages of light reading for you all coming up this week, but really we do encourage you to dive deeply into that report and also to remember that that truly is just the start for us because we do our research in-house. It allows us to dissect the findings in ways that make them actionable so that we're not trying to boil the ocean here. Instead, we're deploying solutions where they're needed most. So with that, we gave you a ton of information, but we want to share a few concrete areas where we think the collective ecosystem can really lean in. One of the findings that was most jarring for me was the findings around military spouse well-being, specifically how they're turning to emergency medical support as it relates to their mental health. We must begin treating military spouse well-being as a national security imperative. Throughout the report, spouses, particularly spouses with children, consistently reported some of the most concerning outcomes as it relates to multiple measures. Yet spouses are often the people managing the realities of everyday military life. They're the ones figuring out the childcare, the healthcare, the household stability, the relocations, the family transitions. Their well-being is not just a nice to have, it's an element of readiness. Second, we must modernize the PCS experience. The data continue to show that military moves create disruption across nearly every aspect of life, from employment to healthcare to financial stability to community connection. A military-directed move should not be creating avoidable expenses that military families must absorb. The PCS system must be designed around the realities of everyday military life. Third, we must rebuild the military support system for a new generation. What we saw time and time again was not necessarily if a resource existed, but if people were aware of the resource and able to access it when they needed to. We have to think about this next generation of military family, and we must deploy services that are cohesive and are in line with how they want to and need to receive support. Fourth, we have to stabilize healthcare for military families. Across the data, we continue to see concerns related to accessing care, finding providers, navigating referrals, obtaining timely services, and reliable access to physical and behavioral health care is foundational to family well-being. Seeing that 5% of people had gone without any medical care, that's something that we can't have happen. And finally, we have to prepare for what comes next. One of the most intriguing findings across the report was that they didn't always know if life outside the military would bring more opportunities than life inside the military. It begged questions around, are some of their decisions related to what's happening in the broader space, or are these really connected to the realities of military life? We have to make sure that military family well-being feels attainable, and not just attainable in the moment, but attainable in the future. So, we're now going to go into the next phase because we shared a whole lot of information with you, and now we want to get to the action piece. So, I'm going to invite a few incredible panelists to join me here up on the stage. Mr. Stephen Simmons, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of War for Military Community and Family Policy, Lieutenant General Brian Kelly, U.S. Air Force retired, the CEO of Military Officers Association of America, and SEAC David Isom, Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And we are going to have a little discussion. We're already having a mic drop moment. All right, gentlemen, so we just shared quite a bit of information with you. I want to start off by asking a question that was not scripted, so sorry, here we are. What was the biggest takeaway for you all? Like, when you heard all of that, what was the thing that gave you the whew moment? Or, okay, we're doing better here. And we'll start with you, Mr. Simmons.
Wow, put me on the spot. No, Shannon, thank you so much for putting this survey together, and just congratulations on the amazing set of data there. Over 10,000 respondents, that's an achievement unto itself. Shannon, I think what I would say first and foremost, and the aha or the takeaway or the we have a problem is the continued lack of what I'd call like financial resilience. And, we just see if there's even a pin drop in the road that causes the car to swerve, financially for our military families. And I think we saw that. We know when that survey launched. I remember having to sneak out of the Pentagon just to come join you. That was a lot of fun. But but when we look at I think military service should be very consistent, and it's pretty clear there's a lot of barriers that, if even one minor thing goes wrong, not just a banana peel, but a sliver of that banana peel hits on that financial road, automatically our military families almost go to crisis.
Great. IBK.
Yeah, first let me echo Secretary Simmons. Shannon, just say congratulations. This is fantastic. I used to have a boss who had this big sign above his door that said, in God we trust, all others bring data. Right, and you guys brought the data, right? This is what's so important, is to have in this space that can be particularly emotional at times and stuff because of the impacts we saw, the great videos that you guys showed, to have the data behind that takes away the emotion and lets us have great conversations. I think the biggest takeaway for me is when you see these things, you like to go, hey, there's one thing we can do, right? There's so many interconnected things here, right? And you guys did a great job of teasing that out and showing the impacts from the financial piece and how that then impacts food insecurity and other things like that, right? This takes a lot of work, right? It takes a lot of singles. There's no one home run that fixes all these things. And we're sort of making progress in here, and I'll give Secretary Simmons a lot of kudos, and the SEAC. You guys are doing some amazing work that's really moving the ball. But it takes a lot of singles and doubles and stuff to add up, and what you guys showed here is the interconnectedness of these things and the need for us to pay attention to that and treat it as a whole ecosystem and not one-offs.
Yeah, I'll echo, great job by you and the team, awesome, continued great work by MFAN. I think the thing that jumps out to me is this just reinforces what I see every day as I travel the globe with and without the chairman and talk to families, talk to service members, my wife talking to military spouses, is this is the truth. This is what we're seeing around the globe, and this just reinforces all the things that we see already. And it is all interconnected.
Absolutely. Well, now I'll get back to the script. So let's talk about military spouse employment and unemployment. So we saw that rising number was about 30%, 29.9%. We also saw about 70% were not accessing the resources. And there are incredible resources that are out there for military spouses as it relates to this. Then we also see the childcare piece and the interconnection between these things, like BK mentioned. Sir, you're doing a lot of work right now as it relates to military spouse employment. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you see this reflected in the data?
Well, Shannon, yeah, honestly, there's no surprises on the data front at all. We see the exact same thing. Like every bit of that data you presented, like, I wish I could say we were surprised, but no, we're not. We know this is an issue for a while, and it all comes down to economics. If we talk about root causes, things that cause friction, spouse employment's a big one because it's 2026. You need a two-income household, and if the military spouses do not have meaningful careers, not just a job, a career, it's going to be a struggle. So we really kind of set out on that already. We just rebranded our military spouse employment programs to Spouse Works, and really trying to get that word out there. We're going to see a little bit more work going into that as we continue, because I think the number one issue still is there's a military family somewhere out there suffering in silence. They have this issue and they don't even know that the resource exists to support them. So, I was excited to see, your response said, well, it would be great if they had this. Well, we do have that. We do have a SkillBridge-like program. Yeah, it's Spouse Works Fellowship now. We do have scholarships. So there are those things, but I think improving the access, but more importantly, improving the awareness is absolutely critical.
Agree. A lot of it comes down to communication, and that peer-to-peer is where we see, and I want to give another shout out to our advisory board, our current and former advisors. The reason why we can get to this number of respondents is because of that trust and that peer-to-peer communication. That was Rosemary Williams' brilliant idea when she came up with the idea for the advisory board, and that really does make a key difference. I want to talk a little bit about the question around the confidence that people have in the military, and also just their satisfaction over time. So SEAC, for you, what are you doing today from a command and from a leadership perspective that can help really build that trust that not just the service member but the whole family has in the institution to make sure they're being taken care of?
Yeah, I think what we see happening today is really inspirational. There's a lot of great work happening. We've got leaders at every level that are focused on the problem with a strong desire to take quick action and to solve what is solvable right now, and then putting in place the long-term things that still have to happen. And I'm seeing that at multiple levels. And I know that the challenge is, I have an old mentor, Greg Smith, who was the command chief at SOCOM, and he said, hey, going into these jobs, one of the most important things you need to understand is how your boss likes to communicate and be communicated with. And it just highlights the importance of communication and how hard it is sometimes to understand how to reach folks. And so I know that there are families out there right now that need some of the things that we're doing, and they're just unaware of it. We're not always communicating in the right ways. And so nailing down how to communicate with them so they know not only that there's great work being done, but just how much so many leaders care about our families and about our service members. And so that's part of it, is getting the right communication happening, and then just continuing to press the gas and go forward as fast as we can to solve a lot of these problems.
So true. And one thing that I think is really interesting is the spouse is often the ones who's, we rule the world, right? But they're making the decisions around what's happening in the moment, but also what's going to happen in the future for the families. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting, we've seen a lot of economic drivers as it relates to what would lead people to stay in service. But we saw this time was more interest in things like work-life balance and choice as far as where the family is stationed. BK, can you talk a little bit about that and some of what you're seeing, and also what Mo is doing broadly around that?
Yeah, so we at MOA, our role is to take the data that you have and get over to the Hill and explain it to them and try to make sure when we can get congressional support for these kinds of things, it can happen. When you get into the quality of life space, the biggest thing you have to be able to do is show the tide to readiness. And that's one of the great things that you guys do in your report, Shannon, and the data that you have is the folks over there have a lot of priorities, right? The country doesn't have endless dollars to spend. And so when they're trying to make decisions on where to spend money, when we can show the direct tie to readiness and how it impacts readiness, I mean, it makes a world of difference. And I'll give you a great example, and it ties to the one that you already were asking the Secretary about. If you think about spouse employment, right, there's a group of folks over there who are working on something called the Work Opportunity Tax Credit, the WOTC. And the idea between the Work Opportunity Tax Credit is that employers would get a tax advantage in hiring a military spouse. The short-sighted view, and we get from a lot of folks over there, is, well, that takes money away from the Treasury. Now we have less money in the Treasury. But the truth is that every person who gets that tax advantage as a spouse, one, is adding money because they're going to pay tax in there. But think about the retention numbers, and if it takes, I think on average, the Secretary would say somewhere around $200,000 a person to train somebody, and the savings you have from every spouse that you employ that doesn't make a decision, as you show the calculus, to separate because our family isn't able to economically keep up, then that becomes pretty easy. It's actually not money going out of the Treasury, it's money going into the Treasury, and it's a tie directly to readiness. So the more we can take quality of life issues, whatever they happen to be, childcare, any of the things that we've talked about here today, and show how they impact readiness with data in a direct way, the more they listen over there, the more they start to pay attention. And I know our folks who talk about, for instance, the Work Opportunity Tax Credit, by the way, both for veterans and military spouses, Congress disappointingly didn't re-up that last December. But when we show them the data, all of a sudden they go, wow, we need to change our opinion about that. We need to think about that differently. And so this tie to readiness and explaining to them the impacts of quality of life initiatives and how they impact readiness and make a difference for the national defense is the difference maker.
Absolutely. Anyone have anything to add there? No?
Shane, I'll just throw in, I think, we talk about readiness, but spouse readiness starts at home. The warrior ethos starts at home. Spouses are part of that warrior ethos. They are important. They are part of that warfighting function. And I think we recognize it here, and everybody knows. And my wife, if she were here, she would be threatening me if I didn't say it. They make the world go round, and we need to support them.
You're here. One of the things that rose, unfortunately, in the findings was food insecurity. That's something that we've been looking at for years. And when I was meeting with the research team, I was like, okay, we have to make sure that we are looking at this as it relates to different population groups. We know that single service members have access to things like mess halls and things like that. And then when we pulled those respondents out, and we looked at the whole population, the numbers really didn't change a whole lot. From your perspective, food insecurity is a very complex issue. It's also one that there's an element of pride that can create barriers as far as those help-seeking behaviors and asking for support there. What can we do together to bring that number down?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, we've got to, back to the communication topic, we've got to be able to communicate with folks and make sure they understand everything that's available for them to help. We've got to break down the barriers. We've got to remove stigma and make sure folks know it's okay to ask for some help. And then, we bring in a lot of really young service members who are new to living on their own. And they may not have received any level of financial training or education. And so we're falling short on teaching those young folks how to invest, how to best spend every dollar they have. And so we've got to get better across the services at how to provide financial education and training so that they start off on the right foot and they don't end up, as you, in some of your data, you saw, people are becoming dependent on credit cards. That may speak to some of that lack of financial education and training. So we can do better there.
Hey Shin, so I would add a couple things. The CX got exactly right in how to help the folks and train the folks. But I want to fix the problem longer term, too. We want to fix the problem longer term. And so, as Secretary Simmons said, it all starts with the economic piece, the financial well-being, right? Food insecurity, I think, happens when all the other things in the budget line crowd out the food piece, right? So when you get a house first, then I have to have a way to transport myself to work. Then I have to have a way to communicate with my family, and I've paid all these other bills. By the time I get to food, it becomes, it's a priority, of course, but the resources aren't available to get what I need to get done. So last year, the pay raise that we advocated for, I think you and I were on the quality of life panel, folks, and we took a lot of heat for advocating for a big junior enlisted pay raise, but your data proves out that's where the trouble is most acute. And we advocated for that enlisted pay raise, and I got a lot of calls from the building that the secretary works in saying, BK, what are you doing? We can't afford that pay raise. And then this year, the pay raise that came over from the department was high again, which means they recognized the previous one wasn't even enough, right? And so that getting the pay piece right, I think, is really important because it helps get rid of the food insecurity piece, getting rid of the housing problems, things like our BAH, making sure the BAH is there. So other parts of the account don't crowd out the food piece, I think, are really important.
Shannon, going back to the government shutdown, one of the things that our office did, I know you all did as well, and a lot of our partners just out in the world did a lot for our service members, was working to address that food security issue. Because I think there's a lot of service members and their families that said, hey, we don't know if we're going to get a paycheck next week. What's going to happen to our food budget? And that's where we saw like that first big stressor hit. And so I think that was a very conscious decision, and I applaud the department. Like, we were able to make sure the service members got paid on time, but even just not knowing whether you're going to get paid or not was a major factor there. But looking at food security, we've been really pivoting towards not just food security but nutritional readiness as well. And the reason why is because it really goes, like the SEAC said, it goes to education as well. And you all had a data point up there that I found was curious. Was a lot of respondents felt that eating nutritional or high quality meals, it was a financial barrier because those actually cost more. Where reality is, if you know how to cook, you can actually get a meal at substantially less. Going to DECA, there's my shameless plug for our grocery stores. But but I think the issue is it's education, but we have to make the healthy choice easy as well. And I think that goes back to economic security. If both military member and spouse are working, you've got some finances, so when that schedule goes crazy, yes, you can order out. Or if not, how do we make it easy? How do we get meal delivery or meal kits delivered or something like that? So you're going to see a lot more work coming from us on this front. We actually just released our Military One Source cookbook. If you haven't not seen it, check it out. But it was very purposely designed as easy to prepare, healthy meals that you can actually do on a budget, and they're actually very delicious. Go try one. But there's going to be more coming there. But I think there's going to be a constant drumbeat of education, but also getting folks to embrace that a can of Pringles and a Monster that is not food security. It may be food, but it's not the best choice. So getting past not just the food security, but getting towards that nutritional security as well.
Absolutely. So I think you just highlighted something that was really important, and that was during the government shutdown, it really showed the fragility that so many families had as far as the risk and the concern that they felt if they were to miss that pay period. So one of the things and one of the areas where we see some of the highest risk is around a PCS. So those permanent changes of station, we see families putting a lot of money on credit cards. We see families that are spending and with the hope of getting reimbursed. We're also seeing them making housing decisions that put them in situations that are not necessarily falling within the basic allowance for housing, what those allowances enable. What are some of the things that we can do from a policy as well as programmatic perspective to really ease some of those burdens? Because what it's feeling like through the data is that families are shouldering those burdens, and then the government responds. And so that happens when BAH isn't meeting what it needs to. Families are shouldering the burden, we're talking about it, and then it's corrected. But that doesn't negate that they've already paid and they've already struggled during that finite amount of time. So does anyone want to jump in on that one?
Well, first, when I was the Air Force's lead HR guy, I'll just say I failed miserably in this area. We looked at how to release PCS burden a little bit, and we didn't make a lot of progress. So I regret that and wish we could have made more progress. But here's a couple things and a couple thoughts. There is something right now called the STAY Act. And the STAY Act is asking the department and each of the services to look at all the things around PCS and report back for a number of different categories, but one is potentially in some places to reduce the amount and frequency of PCS moves where they're able. Now, I will say, having lived that position, you should never think that there's an opportunity for us to remove PCS as a whole, right? There are warfighting requirements. There are places that we send people that are unaccompanied. There are difficult places that you wouldn't want to overly burden that person, that family, that they have to stay there so nobody else has to move. You're going to move people for warfighting requirements. The question is, do you have to move everybody in all the time, and can you reduce that down? And then to your point about, and so I'm looking forward to the services and the department providing that back and the Congress taking a look at that. It'll be helpful to see. And then I think to your point, is there a way for us to look at providing some kind of study or some kind of number that says this is the money that you should get ahead of time before you PCS, and if you end up spending more, you can then file later on and get more back to you, but you should get some money at some number up front as part of your PCS process to go forward and be able to do that so that you don't have the situation that you described, Shannon. And then the last thing I think we would say at MOA is looking at an opportunity for us working with the Congress in some cases to help make the money associated with PCS an obligation, a 2-year account and not a 1-year account. And I say that because if you're going to cut orders for somebody and tell somebody they're going somewhere in advance, you can tell them they're going somewhere 18, 20 months in advance, but until they have orders in hand with funding associated, they can't do a lot of the things they need to do. And one of the biggest barriers to that is that all the money associated with permanent change of station is 1-year money. And if in some cases, if we could find a way, and we've asked the Congress to look at this a few times, you could make some of that money 2-year money like we do with other acquisition accounts, you might have some more flexibility to help get paid orders in hand more for, further in advance.
Shannon, I'll say I think Secretary Hegseth actually did a mic drop very early on when he took over and he dropped his PCS reduction memo. And I think I'll just echo that. I think reducing the PCS cycle, I was excited to see. It looks like your data shows that maybe having a small effect. We saw a slight little bit of stability, and the reality is that PCS is cost department money as well. It grates on my every nerve when I see service member PCS across East Coast to West Coast, and then a year and a half later they PCS back to the East Coast because we needed them there. And did you really? I think PCS reduction is a part of it. Obviously we will never be able to eliminate PCS, like BK said, because there's a warfighting function, and I think everyone who's served, there's been that time, and if you've ever done a manpower management tour, there are times where you just have no choice, and guess what? Somebody's going to get to go. However, I think getting the PCS reductions right. The next piece I'd call it PCS predictability, and this is where I think there's some policy work we can do, but then some programmatic work that we can really work on. And the first piece of this is we should know, and every service member and their family should know that they're PCSing 6 months out. I think there's some new regs that are directing that. And with some limited exceptions, of course, there's always going to be that very random exception. But if we can get PCS to be very predictable on the front end to where at 12 months out, you're at risk for PCS. At 6 months out, you have orders in hand. That's where we want to get to. And getting to that, PCS predictability. The other piece of that is that's going to allow us to unlock our data sets. So, if you have a child in childcare at duty station, as soon as you have PCS orders, we can start mapping and planning for that capacity requirement at new duty station. So that's something we're working through right there. The last kind of piece of this. I'd call it this PCS impact is, it goes past the predictability, but it's the concierge service. And we see a little bit of that with the spouse employment, but we should see it, we should really practice it everywhere, which is, as soon as we know a service member and their family are PCSing, start proactively pushing them the information to connect in with that community at that next level. So they have the resources waiting for them to receive when they get there. And, I mentioned community. We've got to work better with local communities. I saw on your housing data, the service members and their families are paying more and more for housing. I suspect, and I know that's a direct result of service members seeking good housing and good education options for their children. So I don't know if it's in your full data set yet. I haven't read all 180 pages or anything like that yet. But the other data point I'm very concerned about is the distance that service members and their families are choosing to live away from installations. So not only are they paying more for housing, but they're driving more to get to housing because there's a higher quality of life standard that they're seeking out for their family, and that may be spouse employment. Spouse has a job an hour down the road somewhere else, or it may be better schools. But we're doing a lot of work right now to engage with local communities and local community leaders to improve conditions around bases and make closer to bases where service members want to live. And I think that's going to be a major initiative that we're going to have to continue to work on together to improve local base communities and installation communities. So it's a desirable place for service members to live, because unfortunately we see in the data there's only about 30-40% of service members live on base at any given location, which means those communities have to be able to sustain those service members.
So CX, sir, when we met, we talked a little about mental health and how that mental health, that mental well-being is something that you're really focused on as a leader. We saw some bright spots as far as people's aptitude to seek mental health support. That's good news. We also saw the 14% had sought emergency medical support as it relates to mental health. How can we close that gap? How can we make sure that people are getting plugged into mental health support, so we're treating it like going for a checkup versus waiting till that acute emergency moment when people have to turn to an emergency room?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still, in some cases, there's a stigma around seeking help, mental health support. And I think part of it is leadership, leaders talking about it and destigmatizing it to remind folks, hey, mental health is just health. And if you need help with anything, then it's okay to go seeking that help. That's step one. And then that extends out to spouses as well, because you see we know they carry the burden. They carry the lion's share of keeping the family moving in the right direction and dropping the kids off at school and the shopping and excuse me, and having a career, many of them on top of that. It's a heavy load while their service member may be deployed that whole time. And so we've got to make sure the spouses are taken care of and that they feel like they can seek that care and that it's okay to seek that care. And again, I think some of this is about communication. How do we communicate with our service members? How do we communicate with our families and those spouses to make sure they know that we care and that we're there for them and that it's okay to ask for help? That's part of how we get after it.
One of the things that was encouraging, I think, in the findings was that family health has improved. That is a strong, positive takeaway. And it's, I think, easy to lose sight of that high note when you go through all these areas where there are challenges. And what that tells us is there are those protective factors that really have helped these families get to a point of creating the scaffolding that they need to be able to sustain and absorb some of these hits, like food insecurity, frequent moves, things like that. As you go back to your day jobs, what's something you're going to take with you from this finding, or this findings broadly?
Shannon, I'm going to say I think we measure a lot of data. You and I have had many a data nerd out session by now, and it's a lot of fun. But I think I really liked what you put together on really kind of that family health metric, and I'm wondering if there's not a better way to measure overall family readiness beyond just we have every spouse's phone number, so we have family readiness. I think looking at family readiness as a readiness metric, and I think we're going to take a really hard look at that.
Love it.
Yeah, I think you guys did a really great job and kind of resonated with me, this idea of after some experience and a little bit of time and the resources get better, the scaffolding, as you called it, right, is there. And so one of my takeaways is, how do we make sure we bridge that gap in the beginning? What do we need to do for the folks who are the youngest, who are the most economically insecure, who don't have the amount of experience with PCS? How do we make sure they can get to the point where the scaffolding and the experience takes over? And so, we've been after it for a while and been saying those folks who are most in need are those youngest folks in the force and those youngest families in the force. And I think your data kind of reinforces that. And so, I'll take that back to our team and we'll double down in that area.
I think earlier I heard someone say it takes a village. I would riff off of that just a little bit and say it takes a community of communities. we see that these things are all interconnected. And so there are so many communities that want to help, but sometimes they're disconnected from each other and not working in unison. We've got communities of great military leaders, we've got communities of great policymakers, we've got our medical community, we've got our military communities, the communities out there themselves where we live, we've got the communities of businesses and business owners that want to help, but oftentimes not communicating with each other. And so we've got to get better at connecting those dots and approaching all these challenges from a more holistic approach.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for not just absorbing. I know you haven't gone through all 154 pages. We'll give you a little slack. But, really absorbing this and taking this back. And like I said before, the report even is truly just the start. And what we would offer really for everybody in this room is please reach out to us. It's important to us that this data does not just collect dust in a report online, but also that we're using it, right? And so please do reach out to MFAN. We would love to have conversations with you about the data and how we can collectively work to advance the cause of military families, because the data is only as strong as the collective group who uses it. So gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Almost there, I promise. So today's conversation, we heard about the data, we heard how we can use the data, and now one of the things that, as for all nonprofits, we have partners who make this work possible. And we have partners who make this work possible in a way that's not just funding, it's true partnerships. And without those partnerships, we would not be here today, we would not be where we are as an organization. One of those partners who's been with us really for years is CVS Health, and Dave Lee specifically with CVS Health. They're the presenting sponsors of this research. When I met Dave 7-ish years ago, we started just having big conversations around what healthcare and access looked like for the military community. And it started with brainstorming. What started as brainstorming turned into programmatic efforts. It started from there to research, and it really just continued to grow our advisory board. And it's just been a truly foundational and transformative partnership for us. And so Dave, I'm thrilled to welcome you to the stage.
Thanks, Shannon, and thanks to the entire MFAN team. I had some comments that I started to write, and last night I was reading more of the report and read more this morning, and I threw my comments out because I found some of the quotes from military families extremely touching, and it reminded me of something. And I wanted to share a little bit, something a little more personal, and a little bit of why this work is so important to me and why I've developed the relationship that I have with Shannon and the rest of this team. It's easy to look at this data and say we're not doing enough. But I want to share that I come from a family where my mom was a Gold Star daughter. Her father was killed during World War II. She didn't really know what that term was. My dad got drafted in the early 50s. They had watched classmates from their high school that went off to the Korean War and never came home. My dad got sent to Europe for 2 years without my mom. She never thought of herself as a military spouse. Think about that. We want to talk about these programs and things that we're doing today and where we're falling short. Those programs didn't even exist. So I want to thank the members of the Department of War for coming out and for all that you do for our families, because we are making a difference. But I'll also say that I retired in 2009, and Shannon's heard the story, and many others in this room. I wish organizations like this existed when I was wearing a uniform. I retired in 2009 as a colonel. I had been a battalion commander and a battery commander, and at no point did I have organizations like this that I knew that I could turn to to help. And so having these organizations and having somebody that's giving our families a voice is extremely important. We aren't doing everything that we can. There's more that can be done. We know that. The data shows that. Together, we can make a difference. My parents also lived through World War II, and our country made huge sacrifices to support those that were in uniform and deployed in Europe and in the Pacific. Think about how much many families in our country today don't do to support those that serve. There is a huge opportunity to go well beyond the people that are in this room, the people that have worn the uniform, or the people that have had a family member that served. We need to get back to all Americans wanting to step up and be able to support those that served. This isn't just about obligations of the Department of War. This is an obligation of every American that has made the decision to not serve, to support those that do. So, now to talk about a little bit of what we've done with MFAN. It began a few years ago. I won't say how many, but yes, it's been a long time we've had this relationship. It began with the advisory board, and I had the opportunity to hear from military spouses about some of the challenges, and that inspired me. And then we began to do work with the research and investing in how could we look at programs that could address some of these problems. So last year, in partnership with MFAN and Hope for the Warriors, we launched a pilot program in Jacksonville to support Camp Lejeune and the surrounding community. We wanted it to look at how can you welcome new military families and help put them on a successful path when they arrive. And that was based on the data that we were getting out of the research from MFAN and things that we were hearing from the advisory board. And so we launched the PCS Pantry Box program in combination with Hope for the Warriors that has a Cohen Veteran Network Clinic that provides mental health support, not just for veterans, but for military families and children. They have a specialist that supports the children who are dealing with the struggles, some of which we heard in these videos. But one place isn't good enough. And we've made a commitment with MFAN that we are going to expand to 4 more communities this year. Hampton Roads in Virginia, Tampa, San Diego, and the Joint Base Lewis McChord area. But we can't do it alone. We can't do it alone. We need other partners to step up and help support us go deeper in those communities and help expand to more communities beyond that. And so I would like to introduce my good friend from USAA. David, please come on up on stage. I'm excited that there's now another big organization to step alongside CVS and many of the other organizations that you've seen up on the slides today to work alongside Shannon and her team. So David, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Such a teammate, great partner. I'm really excited to see where we're going to go. Gabby, MFAN team, you guys, your work speaks for itself. Thank you. Many of you might have heard about USA's commitment to a program called Honor Through Action. It's a $500 million over 5-year commitment to solving some of the biggest needs of the military community. It really focuses around 3 things: meaningful careers, financial security, and well-being. That is data-driven. It's not just data-informed. That is what our members tell us are the biggest needs that they have, and that's what the data proves out. We saw that today. And what I think is unique about this is it's not just a philanthropic commitment. It is a commitment across all the different levers that affect a military family's life and ones that all of us can bring to bear. So yes, philanthropy, but also policy. A lot of things that we're talking about today are outcomes of policy opportunities, or in some cases, strong policy changes. Also, as corporations, we have an obligation if we aim to serve military families, what are the products and services that we offer that we can do, that we can make adjustments to make it more accessible for military families? And then the other thing that we've realized is that we can't do this alone. We've brought along 20 other leading companies that you know and love, that have all raised their hand to say, we want to be a part of this. And so we're really proud to talk about On and Through Action. It's not even a year old yet, but we're already starting to see improvements in military families' lives. And that's why I bring to the stage today is it's a little bit of taking the great work that CVS and MFAN have led for so many years and to announce kind of a new partnership with MFAN, where MFAN is the backbone of measuring the impacts that our On and Through Action program will make. And it is a long-term commitment. This is a 3-year commitment that we intend to keep going on and on and on, because we want to track the outcomes of military families as we make impacts through those different programs. And we'll see this in the fall through a representative study of those currently serving, and you'll start to see things like an index that we release next year to talk about what is the overall readiness of military families, quality of life. Mr. Simmons, you talked about that. I think we're on that track, sir. So stay tuned. If you're interested, come find myself. My teammate John Byram is here with me. We'd love to talk to you about what we're up to, and stay tuned because there's a lot more to come. So without further ado, Shannon, would you come back to the stage, please?
So all that to say, a lot more to come, and we could not do this without everyone here and the people who are joining us on the live stream. Thank you again to our presenting sponsor, CVS Health, and to all of our partners. This work truly does take a village, like we talked about before, and I also just really want to footstop the gratitude for the MFAN research team. This work is heavy, right? And reading every single one of these responses twice is a lot of work. And they bear that, and they take this work seriously, and we all do. And so now it's incumbent on all of us to take this information, to take this report, and integrate it into the work that we do each and every day. So I hope you'll all join us next door in a few minutes. We'll have a little reception, and really it's an opportunity to start the conversation. How can we together work to drive positive change for military families? But to everyone who's here today, thank you so much for an incredible afternoon. We hope you learned something, hope you learned a lot. And to our partners, thank you for everything that you do for us and what we can do together. Thank you.